Hello and welcome to the Miko Bits Show, and I'm your host, Miko Bits, and today I have a special guest for you, which is Robby Young, who is CEO of Animoca Brands, which is a very advanced, thought-leading company working on the future of gaming, especially integrating blockchain and NFT. So, it's really exciting to have such a thought leader in the space on the show. So I guess let's try to get straight into it. So, hey, welcome to the show, Robby.
Good to be here. Good to see you,
So,
Mika.
fantastic. It's great having you. So I'm excited just to jump right in. So I think, to me, what would be exciting to hear about is, first of all, like, how did you get excited about, the technology, the blockchain technology?
So, we've been a gaming studio for years, and we've been particularly focused on mobile since mobile began, pretty much since '09. And as mobile matured, I think one of the things that we recognized was that it's ripe for disruption. And when our friends at Axiom Zen, now known as Dapper Labs, came along with CryptoKitties, we jumped at the opportunity to partner with them. So we were, hopefully relatively early into this field as the publisher of CryptoKitties in China. And once we discovered what they were doing with CryptoKitties and what potential was for true digital ownership, and technically speaking, in the form of NFTs, non-fungible tokens, this idea of true digital ownership, we really felt was going to be a real just sea change in gaming, because it has the potential, I think, to have an impact on games, as big, if not bigger, than the idea of being online, as opposed to having a single player offline game experience.
Yeah, it is super exciting. We've been in a number of conversations, but Jake Bruckman was talking about really thinking about rebuilding the internet on the basis of kind of owned intellectual property, right? And so you can see how something like a programmable money or kind of DeFi around this notion of kind of controlled, owned, and programmable intellectual property assets becomes almost a really new world. And obviously in the world of gaming, I think is where the leading edge of all new technology usually resides. So I think for me, I'm super interested to kind of get this sort of early story around CryptoKitties, because obviously so
Sure.
many people saw that, but not that many people had the foresight to kind of like jump in. So what was
I
the
think,
story around that?
sure. I think when we look at, and here, I think, Roham and Benny and the guys are going to be very, very happy. I'm giving
Yeah,
them a lot of props here, but I
of
think
course.
they deserve the credit for really pioneering what could be possible. And I think that if anything, we just take credit for looking at the idea and understanding it very quickly and then pivoting our ship to go in that direction. Because I think while the idea of true digital ownership is awesome, one of the key aspects of that is actually what they implemented in something they call the Kittyverse.
Okay.
Because we feel that true digital ownership of content actually starts to flip the idea of a platform on its head. Because games have been seen very much through the lens of, and content has been seen through the distribution platform lens now for quite a long time. So people think of Netflix and YouTube and Spotify. These are all platforms for the distribution of content, as is obviously the App Store and Google Play. But when we think about, once you own that content, that actually has the ability to change. So what they did with CryptoKitties was they created this idea of the Kittyverse. And it's a very, very simple, powerful idea. The idea is, in the game of CryptoKitties, you're buying and collecting kitties. And so all of the players of the game own kitties. But they opened up basically the API of the kitties so that other developers could say, hey, if I want to develop a game for people who own kitties, something that's different from what CryptoKitties is, I want to create a driving game or a Pac-Man style game for kitties, I can do that as a developer, and anybody who owns a kitty can then bring it into my game and play. So from a game developer standpoint, that actually makes a very interesting opportunity, because I have a built-in market of players who are willing to come and play a game because it adds value to the kitties that they already own. And it becomes a sort of a mutually fulfilling prophecy, because it enhances the value of kitties, it enhances the value of the original game, CryptoKitties, and also then generates value for the new developer. So it's in everybody's interest for more content to be created for kitty owners. And this is really powerful, because until now, until NFTs, we've not had a way in which you could actually bring content from one game environment to another.
Yeah, I did go up to Vancouver to hang out with Raham and talk about, what they're building. And it is absolutely visionary and very exciting. And obviously when you look at the evolution of their platform, one of the things that became a really interesting pivot for them is exactly what you're talking about in the Kittyverse, right? Which is that one of the big applications that was built on top of CryptoKitties was hats, right? Which is that, some clever developer created a game where you could put hats on your cats, right? So hats on cats, and then you basically buy hats and then you put them onto hats, right? So it becomes combinatoric, right? It's not like breeding cats, it's a completely different mechanic of interaction between the asset, right? But it's all built on top of the ownership of the base asset, right? Which is, exactly what you're describing. And the thing that's important about the concept of like a platform for content and content ownership is that you're right, it creates multi-game experiences, and I know you're getting into that, and so I'd love to hear more about how you're playing with multi-game kind of single content items that straddle multiple games. But I think the thing that, before we go there, I do want to say that form of composition was actually the inspiration for the migration from Ethereum, right, which I think doesn't have both scalability and composability as a function of sharding, right? So that's the reason why they basically built their own, what was at the time called Bamboo and is now called the Flow blockchain, right? So I just wanted to kind of like dig there, but to me the central point that you're talking about is more of a business model point around gaming, right, which has to do with kind of how these assets can become shared, and that the assets can actually represent user bases that can be migrated from game to game, right? So I think that's super interesting. So I would love to hear about kind of Animoca's kind of business strategy involving kind of migration of assets from game to game, and how do you see that happening? And yeah.
So I think we're at the moment, we have two strategies that you can see in the products that we have in the market. So the best known products in the world blockchain gaming in our portfolio at the moment are two titles. One is called the Sandbox, which is produced by Pixel, or the Sandbox team, which we acquired several years ago. And that is a Metaverse product where it focuses on user-generated content. The next one is called F1 Delta Time, and hence the Formula One cars there behind me. And that is a product created in partnership with Formula One, so it's an officially licensed product. And we basically create collectibles featuring cars, drivers, helmets, car parts. We have a racing game. We have all the tracks from around the world. So it's a full-on simulation of the F1 experience, but with the additional layer of complexity of what blockchain and NFTs offers over and above what you would get on like a console or web game experience. So there's a literal economy of cars and parts and ways you can upgrade your cars and things you can do with your cars. And we've tried to really add in a lot of new features that sort of show off what's possible when you use the blockchain. So the first major step that we made in that direction was actually a creation of an in-game currency, which is Rev token. And the Rev token, the idea behind that was, in addition to cars and drivers and parts all being NFTs in the game, we want also to have a fungible currency in the game so that it basically functions just like any other in-game currency. And this goes back to a macro theme for us. First of all, we think, and this was one of those light bulb aha moments back in 2017. We think that now that we understand how blockchain can impact games, we think every game should be tokenized, meaning all games today have an in-game currency, and why shouldn't that be a tokenized currency? So what we've done with Rev in F1 Delta Time is made that a functional in-game currency. And we've also said that Rev is going to be the in-game currency of our upcoming games featuring other motorsports products. So we've licensed MotoGP, which, there are tons of millions of fans around the world of MotoGP, and we'll be building that with on the Flow blockchain, actually. And then just today we announced that we've also licensed Formula E, which is the fully electric motorsports series Jean Todt started back in 2012 or 2014. And so that means that for people who own Rev and like to spend it on motorsports games, there'll be 3 different game environments just from us at the start in which they can spend their tokens. But more than that, we've also created the ability for them within the game, for example, in F1 Delta Time, to stake their cars. And so they can actually earn yield from staking their cars and earn yield in Rev tokens. And so what we're doing is we're taking a little bit of a DeFi metaphor there, but applying it to a real world situation. Because if you think about it, different types of people are attracted to the game for different reasons. Some of them will come to the game because they love Formula One and they just want to collect authorized F1 merchandise. So people pay a lot of money for limited edition F1 NFTs because they're authentic collectibles with a provenance, and they're also exchangeable as NFTs are on OpenSea and other marketplaces. So it's that type of person. Some people come to the game just because they love to play racing games and they just want to play and it's about driving. And then other people will come to the game because they think, oh, well, this is interesting. I come from a sort of crypto background, and the idea of collectibles that are also tokens interests me because there may be an angle for me to invest in this and generate yield or make money. And so the reason we offered staking was because that can marry a couple of those different groups. So if you're somebody who just wants to invest in a collectible or invest in an NFT for yield, then you can stake it, earn Rev tokens, and while you're doing that, we can then put the car back into the pool and it gets rented to people who just come to the game to play. And so that way they can't afford perhaps to buy the NFT of Lewis Hamilton's season-winning car, but they could rent it, right? And they can send Rev to rent it and enter it into races and have the opportunity to drive a car, but at the same time paying those rental fees back to the actual owner of the car. And that's something that can be done now in a truly, real world economic way, which before would only be able to be simulated in a game. But now we're actually talking about real financial transactions because these are all, based on NFTs and our Rev in-game currency.
Yeah, that's amazing and really interesting. Do you see kind of future integration between racing and things like Sandbox?
Yes, definitely. Because I think one of the things that people want to do is for gamers and real fans who are here for the game experience first, and for whom, maybe making money or yield or things like that are sort of secondary, just, it's sort of gravy on top. I think for people who are there for the game experience, the big difference for blockchain games is the fact that as they spend money and upgrade their cars and have really invested in customizing their cars, that they can bring those cars into other environments. And so to be able to bring those cars into the sandbox is a massive plus, because today you have to play in all these games separately in their own walled gardens, and you may build up your character's strength or your car's speed or engine size, but it has to stay on an island. Within blockchain gaming, now we can actually cooperate with other developers and allow players to bring their stuff from game to game. And that's really exciting.
Yeah, I think it's very exciting because what we're really talking about is the emergence of something that kind of moves towards like a Ready Player One multiverse model, which, I think you alluded to with the Sandbox, right? And so the
Yes.
thing that's really intriguing about that is it really starts to intersect social media, right? Because in a sense, social media is a lot of social media sort of about vanity and ego and kind of display. And, like if you look at Instagram, there's tons of like real world sort of modeling of products, like look at I bought this accessory, so there's a
Hmm.
lot of kind of showing off and there's a lot of sort of vanity, involved in social media, right? But what's
Hmm.
interesting about the emergence of like an authentic true ownership model on blockchain is it enables kind of gamers to have almost like trophy room, right? I think Jake Buckman was talking about kind of art collections, right? But I think
Hmm.
in gaming, it's sort of borderline art, but it's really more like game asset or trophy collections, right? Like look at what
Yeah.
I achieved, right? And I can hang this in my little throne room or whatever, however I want to show it off, right? Some gallery, right?
Sure.
And other gamers can come into this shared space and look at these things, right? Because the thing that's been really complicated. So I had a conversation with my son about free to play games, right? And I asked him like, well, what's the deal with free games? Why do you like free games? So it turns out the mechanic is this. The mechanic is that what it is the player who's gotten status in the game. Let's say they've gotten this weapon in the game and it's cool, right? They want to show that off to their friend, and what they want is they want to show how cool they are in this game to their friend, right? It turns out that the dollar cost of coming to see how cool your friend is in a game is zero. Right? It turns out that
Yep.
convincing your friend to come to a game to see how cool you are is worth nothing to your friend. Right?
Yes.
So if you say it's $5 game, your friend isn't going to come watch you and how cool you are in this game. Right. Which
Hmm.
so to me it I thought it was much stupider than that. Like I thought it was like free to play games are popular because they're free, and that's not the only mechanic at play here, right? Like there
Yes.
is a social vanity mechanic which I think is meaningful. And what you're describing is an opportunity. It's an incredible opportunity to create something that could be as powerful as like Steam, right? It could be as powerful as like these game app stores because the guy could be like, well, where'd you get that sword? It's in your throne room. And someone could be like, I'm playing this game, and that's a
Yes.
really amazing social meeting ground. It's
Yeah.
way better than just like, oh, this game got 4 stars on Steam. So I'm just thinking about this more like a game catalog or, and social media.
Well, I think in sort of traditional free-to-play game building, we always think about different player paths in the game. You think about how players can grind their way in the game, as we call it, which
Oh
just
yeah.
means spending hours and hours to earn that status, to earn that sword, or you have to win a certain number of battles until you can get the prize.
Yeah.
And then the second path, which tends to be often a path that's very important to provide in Asian markets specifically, is the purchasing path, because it acknowledges that there are people who love to play who may not have the same amount of time to play. So you allow them the ability to spend money to then buy boosters and add-ons that will help them get to that goal faster. And so that way you can serve a player base that has lots of time, as well as a player base that has lots of money within the same game. And I think that then that brings us to this idea of play to earn, because that's actually something now that we're thinking about within blockchain games, because the fact that you can then take the rewarded in-game currency back out of the game and convert it to fiat or Bitcoin or whatever you like, then adds a new sort of characteristic to that idea of spending time and earning money inside a game.
Yeah, if you go back to IGN and the birth of kind of World of Warcraft economies, right? Then you do see not only in-game gold purchasing, right? So you can
Mm-hmm.
buy in-game gold, which Blizzard at the time didn't actually like, and they eventually got rid of. But the other thing you can actually buy is like a grinding service, right? And the thing
Yes.
that was kind of fraught about that is you were kind of dependent on the brand, because you would effectively hand your password of your account over to this company, right? And the company would level your character for you, right? So,
Yep.
in exchange for money, right? So, and obviously there's some escrow, so you don't have to pay them if they steal your account, right? Stuff like that. But like, at the end of the day, like the concepts you're talking about are, they already have the market demand is proven.
Yes. And I think maybe to take a step back and look at the sort of big picture of this, when I go, you were asking about what was our sort of thesis at the beginning of why we pivoted to blockchain games so quickly. And I think the other part of it is looking at the numbers and looking at the potential of basically bringing the world of, 2.5 billion gamers into blockchain games. Because if you look at blockchain games now, it's already, a very successful niche industry based on games that generate thousands of players per day. Whereas, in mobile gaming today, you would need to have probably tens of millions of players, or at least 1 million players a day just to be able to generate decent, revenue on a free-to-play game. So I think part of the attraction of the investment thesis of going into blockchain gaming is that we're just, around the corner from a big tidal wave of user adoption once more mainstream gamers start to discover it. And I think this leads us into, discussions of some technical aspects of onboarding and stuff, because I think, it's obviously early days in blockchain games, but if we think about, that thousands of player base ramping up to tens of millions of players as we see on mobile games, the ecosystem just, we're barely getting started.
Yeah, I mean, Andre Kranya, who's sort of a famous DeFi person, creator of YFI, like he really was interested in this idea of NFT and he got fascinated by it. And I think it's smart actually, because one of the things I've been thinking hard about is where does yield come from? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, yield only comes from three places. Like one place it comes from is something like Bitcoin that effectively resists inflation, right? So the more governments inflate currencies, so if you look at dollar to Bitcoin, you could also look at it as the dollar is decreasing in value. And the reason why it's imperceptible is because the British pound and the yen and all other fiat currencies, and the euro are all also decreasing in value, right? So if you place if a deflationary currency, or eventually deflationary, at the moment it appears to be slightly inflationary, but if you have a currency like that, it's going to appear to increase in value, right? So that's one source of yield. The other source of yield is basically people getting wrecked. And that's a large source of yield, right? Which is that people are taking risks, and the people who are kind of taking bad risks and losing money are typically losing money to others, right? Who have made the opposite bet, right? So I think that's another source. But I think the final source is actually net new novel value creation, right? And if you talk about things like entertainment and you talk about ownership of art, like both of those things are about actually fundamental net new value creation. So as a frontier, I think it's pretty exciting. On the converse, thing that's important to know is that I think that you actually need a robust base economy to support this kind of like arts and gaming economy. But I think the thing that cracks that open is what you're talking about, which is play to earn. Right. So, I had Gabby from YGG on my show, and we absolutely dug into play to earn. Right. Which I think cracks it open. Right. Because the thing Jake Bruckman was saying is, oh, my God, artists are becoming full-time blockchain entrepreneurs, and they're making NFTs. And that's amazing. Right. But if you look at Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, how many artists are there? And it's the tip of a giant pyramid, right? And the number of artists that can be supported by an economy is still a fairly limited number, right? But the thing that's so interesting about play to earn is that the number of gamers that could be supported could be a much higher number. So I'm not, how do you respond to this kind of thinking?
So I think the best example of play to earn, I mean, you can obviously grind in games and be a sort of a deputy player, if you will, as you were talking about in the World of Warcraft scenario, where play to earn means people who can afford the time, often in economies where average wages are perhaps a little bit lower. They can spend the time to play games, and where there are high value rewards to earn in games, then the trade-off of their time versus earning those rewards, which they can then resell, is worthwhile. I think the other side of play to earn that's very interesting is more what we're doing with Sandbox and what you referred to in art and NFTs in general, which is the idea that this technology enables people to be creators, and it enables people to create things that can then have an actual monetary value as opposed to solely an enjoyment value. They have two aspects of value there. So within the Sandbox metaverse, for example, anybody can be a creator, download the creation tools, and make items in the game which they can place in the marketplace so that other people can buy them and use them in the game as well. And I think that's really exciting, because that basically allows people who have a certain amount of creativity and skills to generate income or to generate revenue from monetizing those skills. And that's it's another form of art, because obviously game design, content design is another kind of art. I think that for players, it's exciting because there is the potential for them to actually recoup some money that they play in games. A lot of the focus of our discussion and the focus of the attention on FTs and blockchain games right now is this idea that you can not just play games, but you can make money. But I think far more sexy in the long term is actually the idea that you just don't lose all your money. And I know that doesn't sound too sexy, but if you look at the gaming economy right now, the world spends $150 billion a year in games that they don't get anything back at all, zero. Whereas, what do you think they would spend on games where they could get 10% back when they decide, I'm bored with this game, I want to cash in my chips and move on to the next game? Well, if there was a marketplace for them to cash in those chips, sure, some people might make money, but if you just got 10 cents back on dollar, maybe you'll spend 10 cents more to begin with. And all of a sudden, the $150 billion game market, adds another $15 billion, just like that.
Yeah, I do love that. One of the quotes I saw on Twitter, I think it might have been Anthony Sassano, or it might have been Jameson Law, but he said that Bitcoin is not a get-rich-quick scheme. It is a don't get poor slowly scheme, right? Which I think it kind of fits this mood, right? Because, and the thing that's so funny about what you're describing is that this phenomenon may actually reverse what you're describing, right? Because to me, you're describing a case that is absolutely consistent with human behavior and is exciting, right? Which is, what if you could get 10% of that effort paid back to you, kind of almost like a credit card cashback type of phenomenon, right? Which is fine. But one of the things that I was talking about with the CryptoKitties guys is we were really trying to reason hard about the durable value of CryptoKitty and what is a blockchain. So what I asserted that a blockchain is a novel history recording device, right? And that the novelty of the history is that it is a consensus history, right? So it's recording consensus history, which is kind of an amazing historical event, right? It's really novel, because traditional histories are written by kings, right? The winners, right? Whoever dominates the narrative controls the past, right? And whoever controls the past controls the future, right? So that's interesting. So in the world of blockchain true ownership, the player controls the past. And what I mean by the player controls the past is, let's say that you somehow obtained a legendary, let's say it's a legendary sword, right? It's a unique asset in a game. And let's say that this legendary sword was used to strike a killing blow in an eSports tournament that was like a world championship, right? So that will not decrease in value over time, most likely, right? Like as long as that game IP, as long as that IP continues, right? And when I say the IP, like, I mean, you know what I mean, but my audience may be more DeFi than gaming, right? Which is that these franchises can just keep going and going, even if the original game is long dead, right? The original game can be long dead, but that sword can still have a historic meaning, right? So instead of even thinking, well, maybe I'll get 10% back, it could be that you'll get 10,000% back, right? If you were there, And the other thing that I've noticed in NFT is people also talk about NFT as kind of almost like a relic, and almost in a spiritual, religious sense, right? A relic is almost like I was there. Like this happened. I saw this, like this event, right? And it's like, well, yeah, you were there. Like you were there, or you own, it's like owning the jersey that, the Chicago Bulls jersey, Michael Jordan, championship, I own the jersey, right? So, like that's a thing to say.
Well, and I think the thing that's key is the provenance, as you're saying, because if you look at things like Michael Jordan's jersey, there are tens of thousands of original jerseys floating around that he wore in that game because most of them are fake.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that market is rife with fraud. And when you look at any type of higher value collectible, often people who own them, like artwork or whatever, furniture, automobiles, they sell them through auction houses because the auction houses give them that hallmark of provenance because they're like, oh, well, this was sold to Christie's in 1998 for this price, and so therefore it's legit, basically.
Yeah.
Whereas now, everything can be legit. My F1 car's left front tire can be, the ownership can be traced back to the very beginning because we have unlimited storage on the internet, essentially. So that's really interesting. And that provenance will be very important. As you said, it gives the idea of collectability another dimension because, for example, one of our F1 cars will have the provenance of being Lewis Hamilton's 2019 season-winning car. And because it's a replica of the real-world physical car. But at the same time, a player may use that car in an online event and win a championship within our game world in that car. So it will actually have value conferred by the physical world as well as value conferred by what it's done in the virtual world. And that's very interesting because at the end of the day, if Lewis Hamilton, as he's likely to win this season, if he wins another season, then the value of that car may still go up.
That's the subject of a tweet that ends with the words "few understand." To be honest, which is that the internet has been based on copy paste, and it's been based on the idea of fungibility, right? And so, if you go back to World of Warcraft, right, you could go to the auction house and there would be some crazy character like a hunter jumping up and down with an orange gun, orange rifle or something, right? And everyone would be talking about that person as like, wow, that's the server first. Like that's a legendary item that dropped off of the end game boss in this expansion pack, right? So everyone's really excited about that character, that person he's showing off. It's super fun, right? But a week later, there's 30 guys jumping up and down with the exact same gun, and so it's sort of like, it becomes like, how quickly it becomes meaningless, how quickly it's like, wow, that is so unmeaningful and uninteresting, and everyone's laughing at you now, and it's kind of like, that's the opposite of what we would expect, right? Because the opposite of what we would expect is that, these things, the thing that people don't understand is this notion of class and instance, right? Like in software programming, right? A class is really just this abstract, I could make a billion instances off of the same class, right? That's fungibility. That's a fungible token with an unlimited supply, right? So it's kind of like, well, that's dumb. It's like, what I want is I want the non-fungible token with a supply of one, right? Like I want the first edition. Like I want the actual thing itself, and I think that's definitely sort of a few understand tweet. So where does this stuff, I think the metaverse construct is the perfect place to kind of have those sorts of certifications, so I'm wondering like how you see sort of the future of this, and this gets to Sandbox, I think.
Sure. I think if we were to look back on this conversation or this moment in time 5 years from now, I think we'll laugh a little bit at the whole idea of the problems that we feel like we need to solve today. Because if we think back 10 years ago, people used to really promote the fact that, hey, my game is online, right? And they used to call their business something online because the idea of having a game that was online was new and different. And people started to say, well, yeah, that's why you don't want to buy a console, because those games you can't play with your friends. You want to play online games. And today, we don't even talk about that. That's just like plugging in the power socket. It's part of the plumbing of a game. And I think blockchain is exactly the same. So in 5 years, people will even forget the word blockchain exists, because there will just be an assumption that, of course, I own content in the game that I can sell. Why wouldn't you? What a stupid idea that I would actually give money to a developer to spend on stuff that has no value. Why would I do that?
Yeah.
So I think that we will take these things for granted. And the sort of short-term hurdles to get over are things like making the onboarding process more simple so that people don't have to fiddle around with wallets and all kinds of very complex mechanisms that where today blockchain still shows its plumbing a little bit on the surface, whereas I think we're quickly getting towards a stage where all of that plumbing is going to be relatively hidden. So even today, you can see some blockchain games enable players to come in with just a credit card, and things like the wallet management and the NFT ownership and stuff all happens behind the scenes. And I think that just hints at a future where, a couple of years from now, game developers who know nothing about blockchain will be able to have tools available to them, like they have Unity in regular games, for example, where they can just plug and play elements to enable blockchain inside their games.
Yeah, I like what you're saying. I absolutely agree. I mean, I like to tell people that it's even worse than kind of online games versus games. To me, it's almost such a detail that it becomes like TCP IP games versus like games. You know what I mean? Where like it's, why would someone talk about the protocol? It's like, oh yeah, my game uses TCP IP, your game doesn't use it. It's kind of like,
yes,
my game uses UDP. Like nobody cares. Like nobody cares what's happening, right? They just want the experience you're describing. But to me, what you're describing makes in-game history, and this also comes over almost to esports now, right? Because I feel like when you're talking about durable history, right, the thing that's really important about the long-term durable value of the ownership of a piece of history is that the history represents a cultural or shared experience, right? So for example, owning an original crypto kitty, right, it actually, I think that's durable value. And I think it's durable value because historically you can hold it up and say, this was really the beginning of everything, of this entire concept, right? So I think that's why a crypto kitty would have more value than, let's say, a crypto doggy or some random subsequent collectible that has no other historical import, right? But to me, what it suggests that these kinds of either esports or like if you saw that there are kind of in-game rock concerts and so these kind of shared experiences that create kind of common histories can then create very valuable NFTs. I think that there may be kind of a way of also reasoning about how these collective in-game experiences can become like tournaments and they just see very, very things that everyone watches becomes valuable as a historical artifact. So there may be a need to try to create these kinds of experiences in game.
Yes, for sure. And I think that gaming is all about community these days, which is why it's so funny that we used to play games that were not online, but today gaming is all about not just multiplayer gaming, but even single player gaming is still about joining the Discord server and chatting with all the other people who are fans. And because gaming is a pastime and a hobby, and there's no reason that people are any less passionate about a particular game title than they are about their favorite football team or basketball team. And so to enable those fans to share a communal experience, that's what we do in games these days. And I think that blockchain games add a layer of complexity and a layer of excitement because they enable, through the creation of an in-game economy, they enable people to own a piece of what they love. And if you think about investors, one of the first pieces of investment advice most financial advisors will give people is invest in what you know and what you love, because that's something that you understand. And so I think that's why, when we first launched F1 Delta Time, we sold the very first collectible. We did a sort of a high profile auction to develop some publicity for the title. And to our extreme surprise and shock, the very first collectible one-of-one car we sold for 419 ETH, which was an unthinkable amount for an NFT at the time. It was actually the highest price for an NFT last year.
Wow.
And so people would say, well, why would somebody spend, 419 ETH was $120,000 at the time.
Yeah,
why would somebody spend that on a virtual item? And we said, well, actually, think about it. It's a one-of-one collectible. It's the very first digital Formula One car. So if you think that there will be digital Formula One cars, this is number one. And there's only one. And there will only ever be one. And it will last forever because it's on the blockchain. And if you then ask somebody, hey, well, how much would you pay for, a signed Lewis Hamilton helmet, and pretend that there was only one in existence in the world? Would that be worth $120,000? People would laugh. They'd be like, that's worth millions if there was only one. Well,
Yeah.
Of course, it's a collectible.
Yeah.
So when you frame it that way, or you say, well, what if it was, a one-of-one Picasso picture of Lewis Hamilton's car? Sure, then it's cheap. Because when you divorce the idea of an in-game item and start to marry it to this idea of collectability and rarity, then you start to understand why people are willing to spend certain amounts of money on them. Of course, our job as game makers is to not just have very expensive one-of-one items, but also have items that just allow people to play every day, because you want people who have $5 to spend to be able to have a great time.
Yeah. How do you solve kind of problems though of potentially like pay to win dynamics? Like how do you factor for that?
So I think what you do is, it's like anything else. If you follow Formula One at all, there was a period of time in which people felt like Ferrari was just paying to win because they had the biggest budget, so they had the best tech and they had the best mechanics, and their cars, when Michael Schumacher was winning with Ferrari, it just felt like nobody could touch them.
Yeah.
And frankly, Honda did the same thing with Senna a generation earlier. But actually, I think what we find is that that's just paying to get the best possible odds. Because when it comes down to it, you still got a race on race day. It might rain, your driver might have a headache. There are all kinds of, incalculable factors. So I think in a game, when we create that simulation, it's the same thing. Here's a car that has the best probability, but probability is not one that guarantees success. It just gives you the best chance at success.
That's very interesting, and it's a fair statement, right? Because when you do, I've been watching, many have, the U.S. elections, and it's an astonishing amount of money that's been spent, right? But if you look at the money, it's not entirely clear that the money is what it ultimately is about, right? That it isn't about like, oh, I'm just gonna buy this position. It doesn't seem to work that way. So
No.
and there does seem to be another layer of meaning that emerges, and in a way, like if you're the underdog, right, and you're driving a car that's less expensive, like in a way, like my son talks about this. He talks about kind of the glory of beating someone in a collectible card game with an inexpensive deck, or someone who has an expensive deck, right? So the person has an expensive deck, and when you beat them with a cheaper deck, you're basically like you have a real smile on your face at that moment, right? Because you're like,
Yes.
good luck
Yes.
with your fancy car, I just crushed you,
and also, for example, in our game, the difference between the very the highest powered car, the biggest engine, and the best brakes and stuff, the difference between that, we try to replicate what actually happens in Formula One. So it is an advantage that is only very, very slight.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
It might be an advantage, but it's only a slight advantage, because who's to say that the McLarens are better than the Mercedes or better than the Ferraris?
Yeah, if you get real world bicycle racing and bicycle equipment, right? Like you can actually, it starts getting asymptotic. So, for example, if you get bicycle frame, you can get kind of carbon fiber or exotic ceramics. You can get this ridiculous compound to make frames that shave kind of ounces off of your bike, right? And as you shave, you end up shaving fewer and fewer ounces for more and more multiples, 10x multiples of thousands of dollars, right? So, it just
Yes.
gets cosmologically expensive. And the thing that's so humorous about it is that I think the pay to win crowd is almost like the guy that's paid like $50,000 for this bike frame when he could probably lose 10 or 20 pounds off of his middle and fat, like, so it's sort of like, it's like, good luck with that. Like how, that's how
Exactly.
much your money did for you, it's like, it doesn't always work like that. So yeah, that's
Yep.
fascinating.
But hey, as a middle-aged guy with having spent more than I probably should have on a bike, I can say that one of the things I really like about my bike is looking at it.
Oh
So
yes.
the
And
collectability aspect is high.
absolutely. And it feels good, and so like, and it feels good to ride it, right? Like you're on it and you're like, yeah, this is probably more than I should have spent, but like, man, it feels great. The thing that's so funny is people have many different reasons, right? Like I'm a bit older as well, and I got one of those Peloton bikes, and it turns out that my crappy sunny fitness bike, that was super cheap, turns out that it actually hurts my knees, right? So the thing that's really interesting becomes how much is it worth it to not hurt your knees and to not maybe even permanently damage your knees and maybe have
Yep.
a different experience, right? And
Yep.
so it's very unclear, but I think that your statement about kind of like the cars, I think, is very fair, and I think it's very interesting because these problems are like long lasting in gaming, right? Like if you look at Machine Zone and what they were able to create with kind of their pay to win gaming scenarios, like it definitely got to be a little too extreme. It got to be where
Yes.
you have to pay, right? They're just forcing their players to pay, and if they didn't pay, they would just for sure lose, right? And that was that
Well, and I
that got
think
to be unsustainable.
And I think for blockchain games, the exciting part from the developers side is that I think we have the potential with these new tools to create game economies that benefit the developers to create exciting stuff, but also really benefit the players because at the end of the day, we make our money from a healthy economy, just like, in the financial world, an exchange makes money off there being a lot of volume on their exchange, but actually they're not buying and selling any, they're not owning any of the assets. It's just providing the platform. And we're the same with games because we want players to be able to, if somebody goes and buys and sells an F1 car in our game, we don't want them to have to buy every car from us. We want to enable a marketplace where they can buy and sell cars amongst each other because that will build a healthy ecosystem. We don't have to sell every car under the sun every time. Let them sell it. They come and buy it from us and then they can sell it 50 times after that and make their own money without involving us. Because I think that's what generates health in the ecosystem, and we want to promote that because the more people who come and play, the more that ultimately we will benefit anyway.
Yeah, one of the interesting mechanics that emerges out of things like micro heroes and kind of crafting games, right? Which is that, there's a simplicity of crafting that's much less than the crafting that you would see in a game like Sandbox, where you're actually doing kind of, pixel voxel art and you're kind of actually
Mm-hmm.
developing kind of content from scratch. But but the feeling behind it becomes that people themselves become branded content creators in game, right? So you actually
Yes.
want to own an item that was made by so and so, right? It's because so and so
Sure.
is a known quantity. Like we know that that's a famous person who's done amazing things, so that becomes
Yep.
a really
Absolutely.
weird dynamic as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I'm very excited about it. I mean, I think honestly, we just can't make games fast enough at this point. But we're very excited about it also because we've seen a really good response from people in the community. I think um, we're trying to appeal both obviously to gamers as well as maybe people who have been interested in crypto and interested in blockchain that are not, that are new to gaming that maybe this is a new chance for them to do something with their existing hobby in blockchain where they can add a dimension to it because it's more about content and not just about hardcore tech and finance.
Yeah, and it becomes a bit of an injection point for corporate brands, right? Because you can imagine kind of things like fashion brands getting involved. And like, for example, the car that's kind of closest to you in your background has like a Petronas endorsement, and the next one over has Shell. So like, sure. Obviously that's, that you can't actually have F1 without that kind of stuff. But what I'm saying is that like at some point, the actual Petronas and the actual Shell are going to move in and are actually going to start, doing promotional things, in this space, which I think is interesting.
Yes, well, and I think the interesting thing is that we can convince them, for example, to open up filling stations or things like that in the metaverse of the game. And I think that's definitely one approach we've taken with Sandbox. So with Sandbox, we've worked with content partners. So people like CareBears most recently, or Shaun the Sheep, to create Atari, of course, is probably the biggest name, to create branded content within the metaverse, because people not only like to create their own content, but they also like to see brands and things that they know. And for players who are new to the metaverse, they'll want to go into Sandbox and be like, hey, I've got this land, this space now in the game, and I want to populate it with cool stuff. So I'll go to the store and I can buy, some cool character Miko made with the voxel editor, or I can buy Care Bear and put it in my space as well. Maybe I'll buy both. And so we want to be able to open up those opportunities. And I think brands are quite excited about collaborating in that way, because the success of particularly games like Minecraft and Roblox and Fortnite have shown that young people particularly like to spend a lot of time socializing in metaverses, and so therefore brands see that as an opportunity to connect with them.
And with the COVID shift, like outdoor advertising in Times Square is a little less meaningful than like advertising during a Fortnite rock concert, or and we're also seeing that even just tickling edge, which is sort of non-blockchain, which is we're seeing during kind of eSports tournament. You're seeing I would say appropriate mapping of brands, right? So for example, in League of Legends eSports, you have the gold graph that's sponsored by MasterCard, right? So it's kind of like, here's how the in-game money is going in this particular game. Or you see things like the Red Bull. So there's if you kill Baron Nashor in the game, you get this temporary buff that gives you all this power, right? So these days, that's sponsored by Red Bull. Right, so the idea of like, you drink a Red Bull and now you're powerful and now you can win this game, right? So they're really they are starting to kind of move into branded in-game experiences and being like, yeah, that's what we want to own. Like we want to own that feeling or that experience. And the thing that's so amazing about the gaming is so engaging. So instead of just showing you a video and being like, this is how you should feel about MasterCard, it's like, no, like you actually know how it feels because you've played those characters and you've gotten this buff, and like that's the Red Bull buff, right? So if you're wearing this buff, that's how you feel, right? And it's sort of like, wow, what a powerful moment for that. I think that's come too. So it's exciting to talk with you because obviously it goes pretty far beyond just thinking about this stuff. Like it's not common for people to be doing this stuff as much as you. So I'm very it's a great honor to talk to someone a doer.
I'm happy to chat. I think obviously we both come from a gaming background, and I think that often people who aren't in gaming as an industry don't realize how pervasive gaming is, because it's not as talked about in the mass media. But people forget that gaming is the largest entertainment medium in the world.
It's utterly massive.
Film, TV, music, all pale by comparison. We're bigger than all of those combined. So,
it's only going to grow. I mean, it's absolutely only going to grow. So I totally agree. And when you think about the rising generation, Generation Z and beyond, like it's going to get much, much more intense, these online entertainment experiences. Fantastic. Well, this has been a great show. Thanks for your thought leadership. It's been really terrific.
No problem. Thanks for having me, Nico.
You bet.
See you. Bye.